Emotions can be absolutely terrifying. They are unpredictable, they are illogical, they are chaotic, and they can absolutely shut us down and cause us unbelievable pain at times. But despite all of that, your emotions are not the enemy of your life. I know that they can feel that way. I know, I get it. But your feelings, your emotions, are not the villain. They are not the bad guy. All they actually are at the end of the day is information. Emotions are data that are communicating something to you about your present experience. And sometimes they are communicating something to you about your present experience that you cannot quantify, that you cannot rationalize. Every emotion that you can experience is normal and is healthy. Now, don't misunderstand that. That doesn't mean every emotional response that you've ever had to every situation is perfectly in line with what happened. I'm not saying you never overreact. I'm not saying you don't have triggers. I am saying that every type of feeling you are capable of feeling is a feeling you are meant to be capable of feeling. And there's no emotion that we should just remove from our lives entirely because all of them communicate crucial information to us at times. There are no such thing as good and bad emotions. There are pleasant and unpleasant emotions, but your unpleasant emotions are often communicating very important information to you. The ironic thing about dealing with our emotions is that when we try to minimize or shut down or avoid the unpleasant emotions, we actually increase how much our life is controlled and dictated by the experience of feelings like fear or sadness or anger, because we start to organize our entire lives around trying not to feel those things or trying to shut them down instantly when we feel them. And when emotions become a life ruining problem for you, a source of agony, a source of intolerable distress, it's because you don't know how to have a relationship with them. It's because you don't know how to experience them without crisis or without panic or without unimaginable distress. And that's ultimately why I say, I know that your emotions can feel like your enemy. And I know that they seemingly can do some severe damage in your life. But so often, it's actually the things that we do to try to minimize or manage those emotions that actually causes the damage, not the emotions themselves. I'll give you a quick example of this here. We're going to return to this in a little bit more detail later in this episode. But let's say you have just texted somebody who you're in a relationship with, and this person is normally very responsive to your text messages, unless you know that they're at work or otherwise occupied. Normally, you get a response within a minute or two. And let's say it has been hours. It's been 5, 6 hours. This person has not responded to your text message. So your wheels are starting to spin and you're starting to have some thoughts and some interpretations of the lack of a response up until now. And you're telling yourself a story. You're starting to say something like, well, I think they're mad at me. Do they hate me? Are they breaking up with me? Did I screw this up again? You start looking at other text messages you sent. You overanalyze the last one, like, what did I do wrong? What caused this problem? And then you start to experience hurt and rejection and distress, and your thoughts and your feelings spiral completely out of control. They get to the point where you feel like you cannot sit with these feelings anymore. And so you engage in self harm behavior. And then later that day, you finally get a text message back from that person. They say, oh, I'm so sorry. I fell asleep. I took a 6 hour nap today. Something must be wrong with me. I think I'm in a depressive episode. And you realize that you just panicked over that person's depression nap, which you probably also have experienced, and you interpreted it as rejection or hatred that was caused by some screw up you made. And so your reaction is, oh, I'm too sensitive. I always do this. My feelings are out of control, and that's why I have this problem with self harm. But the actual problem that occurred there is that you weren't able to tolerate or live with those emotions without engaging in extreme behavior to regulate them. The feelings themselves are not the problem here. All your feelings were really telling you at their core was this is unusual behavior for this person. It does not normally take them this long to respond to me. I wonder what that means. That's the only initial feeling that happened from this stimuli. Everything else, the spiral of thoughts and secondary emotions that led to the self harm, is simply coming from a lack of your ability to have a healthy relationship with those emotional responses. Emotions are part of your inner physical and mental ecosystem. They are an inextricable part of you. And if you could not feel unpleasant emotions, your life would actually be a disaster. Take anger, for example. Anger is a really unpleasant feeling most of the time, right? And especially being angry with someone you love or care about, it doesn't feel good. I don't think too many people like being angry. But if you could not feel anger, do you know what your relationships would be like? You would get taken advantage of constantly. You would lack the internal warning system that lets you know this person is being disrespectful to me. This person is trying to hurt my feelings. This person doesn't understand me and just said something insensitive or ignorant about me. When we have a habit of villainizing our emotions, it's usually because we are unhappy with a behavior that we engaged in that followed an emotional reaction. And I'm willing to bet that if you look at most of the things you have done in your life that were out of character or that hurt other people around you or that took your life off course, the things you really, really regret, the things you look at and you say, oh, I wish I hadn't done that, they were probably all responses to intense, unpleasant emotions that you did not know how to deal with. And the behavior that you regret was probably an attempt to try to make the emotion go away. So, if we could instead learn how to live with these difficult emotions, how to tolerate them, how to coexist with them, and maybe even how to understand them, and how to learn what they may be telling us amidst the chaos and the distress, we would have so many fewer problem behaviors. And unlike not feeling the unpleasant emotions in the first place, this is an actual achievable goal that human beings can succeed at. One of the reasons that your emotions are so frustrating is because your core instinctual emotional reactions to stimuli don't really mature. Your emotions themselves, your instant responses to a situation or a stimuli, come from a part of your brain called the limbic system. The limbic system is fully developed at birth and does not really grow or mature beyond that. So, a young child, like an infant or a 1 year old, actually possesses a full range of human emotions. What they do not possess are coping skills. And so, as we grow older, we become, in theory at least, more and more able to regulate the emotions that we experience and make healthy decisions about what to do with these feelings. But the feelings themselves don't necessarily change. And understanding that about your emotions is key to having a healthy relationship with them. Because when you're interacting with the part of your brain that generates the strong emotions, it is very similar to interacting with a small child, because in a way, you almost are. And if any of you have spent time around small children when they are in emotional distress, you have probably tried to handle their emotional distress by trying to shut down the emotion, by trying to tell them, hey, this is not as big a deal as you think it is. You're overreacting, or here's why this is actually fine. When you do that, most of the time, when you essentially try to talk a child out of their feelings, what usually happens is the intensity of their emotional reaction actually grows. Because a child's emotional responses are more about communicating with other people than communicating with themselves. They are trying to tell their adults, their caregivers, that something is wrong. And if they see that the adult that they're trying to communicate with does not understand that something is wrong. If a child is really scared of something and the adult says, oh, that's fine, you don't have to worry about that, nothing bad's going to happen, and the child still feels fear, they now feel like, okay, so I'm still afraid. And also, the adults around me don't understand why. And they feel like they have to escalate the emotion. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger because the person that they are trying to communicate with is showing them that they don't understand the level of concern that they are experiencing in that situation. Conversely, when you validate a child, when you tell them, like, oh, I get why you're scared of that, that does sound pretty scary. You still may eventually get into problem solving, right? Like, what can we do about that? What can we do to help you? But when you bridge into that problem solving with understanding and with validation and empathy coming from a grounded and regulated adult, what you will usually see is a decrease in the intensity of the emotion. And the reason you see that decrease is because that child feels heard and seen and understood. And when we feel connected with the person we're trying to communicate with, it regulates us. It tells us, okay, this emotion succeeded at its purpose. We needed this person to understand this feeling, and they do. And now we're working on it together. We are aligned to solve the problem. Only difference here is as an adult, your emotions are often for you to communicate with yourself. Sometimes they're for other people, but we don't always necessarily need someone else to know that we're scared and talk us down from it. In many cases, we can do that now. We have learned and internalized those skills. But in order for us to do that, we still have to bridge into that problem solving and strategizing with validation, understanding, and empathy. And when you don't do it with yourself, remember this part of your brain is basically the same as when you were a kid. And so when it feels misunderstood, when it's trying to communicate to your frontal lobes, I'm scared, I'm anxious, I'm nervous, I don't want to do this, I don't know if I can do this, and you basically tell it, shut up and do it anyway, or use a substance or use self harm to make it shut up, it actually grows. Maybe you manage to numb it out for a little while, but the part of your brain that generates those feelings is frantically trying to communicate with you over and over and over again. Something is wrong. I'm not okay. I need something right now. And you're telling it, no, you're fine. Get over it. Move on with your life. It's going to have the same effect when you do it to yourself as an adult as when an adult does that to a small child. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger and harder to cope with. And you have to use more and more extreme behaviors to regulate it, which causes more and more problems in your life. The way that you can reverse that process, start to decrease the intensity of your emotional reactions, get to a point where you can make healthier choices about what to do behaviorally when you experience that emotion, and ultimately have a healthier relationship with your feelings is by practicing validation, empathy, and understanding internally towards your own limbic system. When you have those big, unpleasant, torturous, nightmarish, chaotic feelings, I want you to use everything inside of your brain, every ounce of cognitive ability that you have to try to understand why. Try to dialogue with it. Try to engage with it. Don't get mad at it. Don't dismiss it. Hear it out. Try to figure out what it might be telling you. And then together, I know it's all you, but these different parts of your brain, let's work together to figure out what to do about this. Now that we have all agreed something's off here, something's wrong. It might sound oversimplified, but it really does come down to that. Invalidated, misunderstood, and ignored emotions grow in size and intensity. Understood, acknowledged, seen, and heard emotions decrease and shrink in size and intensity. And one last thing I want you to consider is that validating an emotion is not approval of the action that followed the emotion. That's what tends to get us into trouble. You yelled at someone because they said something hurtful, or my example at the beginning, you engaged in self harm because you became emotionally dysregulated. Validating your emotions, saying, you know what, I get why I felt that way. I see what was going on for me there. I know my backstory. I know why my brain took that in the direction that it did, does not mean you say, it's fine that I did what I did with that emotion. It does not mean that you approve of the behavior you engaged in after the emotion. But even emotions that led to problem behaviors, behaviors we are trying to diminish or cut out of our lives, still benefit from that internal self validation. So, this, of course, is one of many techniques you can use to have a healthy relationship with your emotions. It may not be the entirety of what you need. This could be an entire series of videos, but I do think this is the most powerful tool in your toolbox for this particular goal. I also think it is the absolute best starting point. So I wouldn't worry too much about what else I can do to have a healthier relationship with my emotions until you get really good at hearing, validating, and understanding what they are trying to tell you and not constantly trying to silence them or get rid of them. So that's just going to put you in a perpetual cycle of distressing emotions getting bigger and bigger and bigger anytime you are not actively doing anything to silence them.